It's a real pleasure for me to be here this afternoon. It's an honor to be speaking to a group that is as dynamic as the Business and Professional Women's Club. So thank you very much for that. And I have had the privilege of being able to go around the world to all 5 continents and meet some of the most amazing, brave, and courageous and strong women in many countries around the world. Women who were running in elections where they were facing violence, where they were really beating the odds. And the courage of these women to just keep on going has been an inspiration to me as well in my own political career and in some of the work that I've been doing. I would like to start by talking a little bit about this small carving that I actually got from a woman. It was carved by a woman in Liberia. And the reason that I want to discuss this carving, and if you can't see it, it is a woman who has a baby on her back, and she's bent over and she's picking up a large canister of water, probably from a stream or a river. And when I first saw this, it was because I had been working in New York with the Democratic Governance Group of the UN, and the director there was Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who was in her early 30s, one of the youngest female ministers in Nelson Mandela's very first cabinet after those first free elections in South Africa. And she had a tapestry on her wall that was very similar to this. And she told me that when she first came to New York, the women in South Africa had given her this tapestry of a woman bending over, in that case I think to pick up firewood, with a baby on her back. And they said to her, don't ever forget why it is that you are there and who you're speaking for. No woman should have to bend over to pick up firewood or water while carrying a baby on her back. And I remembered that. And a few years later I was in Liberia for the Women's Colloquium in 2009. And I saw this carving, and I looked at the woman who made it, and I said, you know what? Told her the story, and I said, I need something to make sure that I remember. And she looked at me, and she said, yes, you must remember that women can do anything. We can even carry water with a baby on our back. And that was really my first encounter with what I see now is the next wave of feminism. And it's a wave of feminism that isn't based on victimhood, but on empowerment. And the way that you look at this statue, I think, is very indicative of that. And what I've seen when going to places like Africa, in particular I find African women, but in other parts of the world as well, is that they have taken what we have built, we, when I say we, I mean North American women, European women, from our grandmothers and our mothers, the first wave feminists, which was very much focused on politics, on legal recognition of women. So this is what Amanda was talking about the famous 5 and our grandmothers or our great-grandmothers who got the right to vote. But the second wave of feminism saw that the legal rights were not enough. And these were the 1960s and 1970s for people my age. These would be our mother's generation. And they were fighting for the social and the economic equality. But somewhere along the way, in the politics of identity and social, some of the political got lost. And what has actually started to happen, and I think that some of the younger generation have started to internalize this, is that we view ourselves as if there's a dichotomy between activism and feminism and business and politics. So that to the point where if you are an activist feminist and you go into politics, party politics, formal politics, you're almost seen as a sellout, and that you're somehow not able to take those same values and contribute. And yet, when I look at the feminism that's coming from the global south, and I think that because of communications technology, international, we can communicate within seconds around the world, that feminism is actually starting to permeate here, and I find that I relate, even though I am a beneficiary of second wave feminism, I relate more to this next wave, which I'll call transnational feminism. You can call it the 3rd or the 4th wave. But it is a feminism that is global. It is much more inclusive. It is actually, if you look at second wave feminists, they were mostly suburban, white, middle-class women. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but the new wave of feminism, I think, because of globalization, is much more inclusive. And it does talk about women as representation of women. So it's not just add women and stir. So you take the current framework, the current structures and institutions, and you just put a few women there, and somehow it's going to change. Because many times in a lot of countries, they're the sisters, the daughters, the wives of the former presidents, and they're very elite women, which might not be representative of all of the voices in that society. And what you find in this new wave of feminism is also that in addition to being it's not about outrage and anger, it's about let's work together and let's build networks and let's get things done, is that you find that you can use that same kind of mentality and that same kind of ideology to apply it to other marginalized groups. And so it's something, and it's also about including men. It's about building bridges. And this is something that I want to illustrate a little bit about how powerful that new wave of global feminism is. And it's because I had the privilege of managing the International Knowledge Network of Women in Politics, which was an initiative by a number of UN agencies, UNIFEM at the time, UNDP, and other international NGOs who were working with women who recognized that they needed to have a platform for women to connect with one another, basically a peer support platform through the internet, through new communications technology. And so they created the I Know Politics website. And what happened was women were able to go back and forth, and this is also something that we are not, in Canada, a leader when it comes to women in politics. We are actually lagging when it comes to women in politics. And I think it's very much because of some of the attitude that women have, that if I'm a businesswoman and I want to succeed, I'm not going to go dabble in politics. Or the women who are activists who are thinking, well, they don't even consider politics as a way to get ahead. So I think that if you look at the networking that's going on, we benefit just as much. And there was a woman in Mexico. And I was in Mexico City, and this indigenous woman came up to me, didn't speak English, she's talking Spanish, and she starts saying, gracias, gracias, and she's blessing me, and she's holding this photo. And I looked at the photo, and I didn't understand what she was saying, and it was a picture of her beaten black and blue. And I got a little bit startled, and I asked for an interpreter. And the interpreter came and told her story. And apparently she was in a small village, an indigenous woman, who decided to run for the village council. And at that time in Mexico, it was against the Constitution for an indigenous woman to seek elected office. And the police beat her. The prosecutor wouldn't touch it. The media were actually attacking her. Her own family started to shun her. And there was one computer and one internet connection. And she told her story. She wrote a blog, which was later cross-posted on a number of other sites, including the one that I was managing. And a group of women in Washington, D.C. read this blog, and they had been in touch with a group in Mexico City that were trying to fight this constitutional provision, and they were able to get together, and using her example, they actually struck down that law so that indigenous women can now seek elected office in Mexico. And this woman was coming to me and saying, if it wasn't for the internet, if it wasn't for that network of women across boundaries, across languages, across ethnicities, around the world, she would have been completely isolated. So I think that one of the largest messages of this new feminism is that it is global and it is about networking. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the numbers, because I think people don't realize that in Canada, women are doing very well in a lot of the different rankings. When it comes to labor force participation, education, health access, women are doing fairly well comparatively. We still have some way to go, but compared to other countries. We're number 45 in the world on the number of women in our House of Commons. We're sitting at 24.7%. And the global average is about 21%. But if you look at the comparison, number 1 in the world is Rwanda at 56%. Number 2 is Andorra at 50% and Cuba at 49%. And then you have the Nordic countries, and then there's a mix. But if you look at Canada, we're sitting behind South Sudan, behind Iraq, and we're somewhere on a par with Namibia and Bulgaria. People don't realize that. It's a wake-up call, I think, to young women in Canada. But the problem, if you look at North America, and there aren't very many Canadian statistics, but there was a big study done in the United States of about 3,800 professional women and men. And what they found was that when asked the question, have you ever considered running for politics? And there was a 15% gap between the number of women who said yes and the number of men. So 15% fewer women. But you would think that with the new generation of young women who have the kind of opportunities that are benefiting from second wave feminism, that gap would be decreasing. But in fact, when they did the same survey on college-age women and men, they found that the gap was 20%. So we are not talking to our young women about politics. There was another study that showed that young girls, and by this I mean primary school aged girls, are 20% less likely to have their parents talk to them about politics. And so I think the message that we can take from this new, very empowerment-based transnational feminism is that we need to bring back the political when we talk about feminism. We need to look at the structures and the frameworks and the institutions, and instead of just adding women and saying, okay, now it's equal, we need to bring all the voices, the representativeness of the different kinds of women, and put them in those institutions to change the framework. So the message for me today, because this is a group of business and professional women, is that you can be a businesswoman, a professional woman, you can be a feminist, you can be an activist, you can be a mother, and you can be a politician. And those things are not mutually exclusive. And so talk to the young women about politics so that the younger generation that's here today, when they get to be our age, they will see their faces and their voices reflected in that House of Commons. Thank you.